everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Light Haven podcast for all things spiritual, mystical, and energetic. My name is Ruth, mystery student towards the awakening of consciousness.
My name is Bianca, lightworker and astrology enthusiast.
Today we have a special guest. We had mentioned that we wanted to bring a relationship coach named Arlan on the podcast. So welcome, Arlan.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, and you're a little bit under the weather, you said, but you're sounding excellent. So
Yeah,
we should be good.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Hey, that's the beauty of this work, right? It's like you can be sick as a dog and just look good from here up and show up.
Yes.
Absolutely, 100%. So before we dive in, because I'm sure listeners will be so eager to want to hear a lot about what a relationship coach does and how maybe you could give them advice that could help them, why don't we take it back a little bit? And Arlan, if you could introduce yourself and share with us some of your background, how you got into this line of work and what it took to get you here today.
Okay, so first of all, I failed a lot of relationships. Failed a lot of relationships. So a little bit about myself. I've only been in the coaching world, in the life coaching world, in the mentoring world about 8 years now. Before that, I had a super successful career as a weapons engineer in the South African Submarine Service. And before that, I had a pretty, what some would say, shitty childhood. My father was murdered when I was 7. Grew up surrounded by, my mom had 7 brothers, all alcoholics. So I grew up in this environment that was all about alcohol, drugs, violence, abuse. That was it.
Quite traumatic.
Yeah, that's heavy.
Yeah. And I mean, you don't really realize this when you're in it. You know, for me, it was just, I was a kid and I was this badass little gangster punk on the street thinking I was all that. But it was only later in life when I sort of started doing the work on myself that it was when my relationship with my son's mom ended that I realized, like, who do we blame now? And there was nobody but me. And so from there, that was a big turning point for me. One of the first things I stumbled across was meditation. I'd never meditated a day in my life. And suddenly it was like, what is this being quiet by yourself business? And like everything I do, like when I commit, I'm all in. And so it was straight from just, 20-minute meditations straight into a 10-day Vipassana sit. And then really learning to understand like how I work, how I think, how energy works. Every piece of personal, professional development that I could get my hands on for free, I would do. I started listening to people like Bob Proctor and Tony Robbins and Ellen Watts and, just getting into all of these things. And the deeper down the rabbit hole I got, the more I realized how fucked up I really was and how much work I had to do. And yeah, then came a point where I just started sharing with people like, hey, I've realized, sharing my failures, sharing the nasty shit that I was discovering about myself. And through that sharing, people started coming to me and saying to me like, hey, wow, I feel so inspired by your story, by what you've just shared. Like, how did you get there? And then I'd share my story. And I discovered that this whole healing journey is just all interconnected like that. We all sharing our experiences, and then somewhere along the line, we resonate with something that an experience that somebody else has gone through, and we realize we're not alone, and suddenly we get to heal and work through that. And so, yeah, I've not looked back, and now here I am.
Sounds like when I was hearing you share your story, it sounded like a lot of accountability. It really sounded like the first step was, wow, I'm messed up, like what can I do to change this? Because that's some things that you find when you come out of like relationships, a heavy relationship or a deep emotional one that you were strongly connected to, like a person you're strongly connected to, and it's just like it's easy to put the blame on them, to be like, well, why couldn't they be this person for me? Why did they have to do this? Why did they have to cheat on me? What, there's nothing wrong with me. And when you have that mentality, you're not going to grow, because you're putting it on them and making it them as the solution as opposed to you being the solution. So I really felt the accountability coming through when you shared your realization and the part you had to play in the unfolding of your life events. So thank you.
I was just really curious because you mentioned you did a lot of work and meditation, which of course really connects for me. I've seen the power of meditation. I also wanted to ask, what were the other things that you did that constituted the work? Because the work is a term that's hot on the internet, on Instagram, and there are books called How to Do the Work. And this book says, no, this is the work. And that book says, no, that's the work. And it's shadow work. And yes, it's all those things. I'm just curious, in your particular case, what would you say would be the top 2 or 3 things that you did that created the shift for you?
Great question. So to answer your question, I'll go back to what Bianca mentioned earlier about relationships, and that is accountability. So the biggest and the first leap of faith that I took was the first personal professional development program that I paid for. And I remember that costing $825 for a weekend program, and I balked at it. I didn't have the money. And even if I did have the money, I don't think I wanted to part with that much money for to go and sit in a freaking seminar with 150 other people. Like, what? I'd never done it before. But what happens when you hold yourself accountable, when you actually put skin in the game and you pay for something? You're like, no, I'm taking this money and I'm investing in me. And suddenly I'm in a weekend program and I've got all of these mentors who are holding me accountable to every single word that I'm speaking over this weekend. And it was something that, I came from a military background, and this was high pressure and accountability, but not in the same way where people are just holding you accountable for being who you say you're going to be or being who you say you are. And so that was the Landmark Forum. And the foundation of the Landmark Forum was integrity. And integrity is in doing what you say you're going to do and being in communication as soon as you know that you can't do it, and getting the impact and putting whatever needs to be put into place to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Therefore, bringing honor back to your word. And that, it was like, I sat in that program thinking, holy shit, here I am in my 30s and I am so out of integrity in every area of my life. And so that was the first one for me. And so with that organization, I end up spending 5.5 years without a break, having accountability at an elite level. Like, you just can't get away with anything. And inside of that level of accountability, one of the biggest lessons I learned was that up until that moment, that time in my life, that I had no idea how to listen. And so from there, a whole lot of things started unfolding. Like, I'm always listening to people with a prefabricated lens. Like, I know Ruth. Ruth is blah, 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 blah. So therefore, every time I get into a conversation with Ruth, I'm already listening to Ruth from this place of, I know Ruth to be X, Y, Z. And this is why so many relationships fail, is because you hear couples argue. Yeah, but you know him. I know what he's like. He's always the same. She's always blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. You've created a story about him or her based on an event that happened. And now you're choosing to stick with that story and you're not going to give it up. And nothing will change ever unless you give it up. So yeah, that was one of the first things. And then I remember sitting in Tony Robbins live event, and I watched this man just call people out on their bullshit. And I was like, he's so direct, but he's so effective. Like, people aren't taking offense. They're actually getting what he has to say. And so then I got interested in, like, what is this man doing? And then I stumbled across NLP, and I went and I got myself certified as an NLP practitioner. I was like, this is such a simple science of your brain gathers information and we create this massive meaning about life. And we can shift and change these beliefs at any point. Sorry?
Could I just ask what NLP stands for, just for someone who doesn't know?
Neuro-linguistic programming. And so I did that. I went and did a certificate in mental health and addiction services just to sort of understand what we already have in New Zealand as a country. Like, how are we tackling and attacking mental health? How are we working with people's problems? And yeah, I think that's the foundation of the work I've done. But then there was also a lot of I did hypnotherapy with Marissa Peer. I don't know if you ladies know her. If you don't, like, check her out. She was the hypnotherapist for Princess Diana. So yeah, you can't get a one-on-one now. Like, she's just blown up. But I was fortunate enough to do a few sessions with her, and it changed my life. Also, the quality, the type of, when I started working on myself, the quality of people and relationships that I was getting into was transforming. So I ended up dating this inner child coach. Her name, Kimberly N. Creative. I don't know how happy she's going to be about me mentioning her name, but hey, it's a shout out. And she'd been doing the work for about 7 years. I'm talking meditating religiously, like for hours every day. And she is next level at what she did. So inside of that relationship, inside of that container, came a lot of accountability for how I was showing up in that relationship. And so just being surrounded by people like who are doing a lot of work themselves really, really elevated my game.
That was really inspiring to hear your journey, Arlan, that it started with taking responsibility and investing in yourself to learn what information and knowledge there was that could support your journey in a practical sense. And then that led to, by changing your energy, your environment changing, and awesome people who are also working on themselves and who are going to show up completely differently, coming around you and being that influence for you. So exciting to hear that transition for you, because that can be something that can inspire someone else. If they're thinking, oh, I could never be like him, you know, I'm living on a benefit and I don't feel motivated. Well, it starts with a decision. It starts with taking accountability and looking to see what is the gap between where I am and where I want to be, and what do I need to do to get there. And knowing that there's courses and supports out there is really important for people who might be looking in at the beginning of their journey. And also interesting that you were close to a different kind of person as well. I've always kind of thought that's very interesting. Like, if two people have done so much work and they're so evolved, how do they show up? You know, are they saints, or are they still, you're still human, right? So you've got more tools in your toolbox, but you're still a human being. So you can draw on those tools, but I don't think that you'll never have conflicts or different viewpoints, right? That's natural because we all see things from different sides, but very interesting.
Yeah, thanks.
So I think that people might be quite interested in, because I know you do normal coaching, but the relationship coaching side of things is going to be fascinating for a lot of people. A lot of people might find themselves in situations where maybe they don't plan to leave. Okay, that's their choice. Now, in the situation, they have a lot of complaints about their significant other. And that can range from things that you and I wouldn't think should be complaints, like, get over it, that's not that bad, to serious things, whether they are verbally abusive, or maybe they are shaming someone about their appearance, or they're not pulling their weight, they're not showing up. And if you were advising or assisting, supporting your average person out there who might be having these types of quite normal conflicts, like we don't see them when they're at a dinner party, but these are the things that go on in people's homes. Is there something generic as a starting point that you can give to these people so they can feel like there is some power outside of the decision to walk away? What can they do, practically speaking? Where should they start?
That's a great question. And usually the first thing when I step into a room and I'm working with a couple, my first question is, what are the agreements of your relationship? And then people look at me like, agreements? What agreements? I'm like, what are the agreements of your relationship? Like, we live in this time where, it's everything is all about feelings. How I feel about this, how I feel about that. But feelings and emotions are fleeting, right? It's not something we should be basing life decisions and choices off. So when people are having breakdowns in a relationship, it's always because there's a lack of agreements and way too much expectation. So I usually, like, the best advice I could give to anybody that's struggling or finding or in a relationship with a lot of conflict is sit down and talk about what are the actual agreements of the relationship. And if there aren't any, then this is it's a good thing. It's like, okay, so that's the problem. There are no agreements. So let's start there. What are we agreeing on? What's your role? What's my role? Like, no expectations anymore. Like, I'm agreeing to take the trash out. I'm agreeing to cook dinner. I'm agreeing to do this. Okay, great. So once we have agreements, it's not personal anymore. Now my conversation with you is about whether or not you kept an agreement or not. Like, it's that simple. So it doesn't have to get emotional. It's like, yo, you broke an agreement. Now, if you repeatedly break an agreement, the next thing that's going to happen is there's going to be like, trust is going to start diminishing. So now I can't trust you anymore. And when it comes to that point, now we can make a choice. We can choose, like, look, now it's on me. Like, you keep breaking the agreement. If I'm going to continue to allow you to break the agreement, then I'm enabling your behavior. So there's got to be a consequence when agreements are broken. And that's something that's going to be part of the agreement. Like, what's the consequence if you continually break this agreement?
What about when there's a difference in power? Like, if he's the big breadwinner, okay, and she feels disempowered by that financial dynamic. And, because I would say, oh, if he's disrespecting you, maybe it's time to walk. What if that is not an option and she's not feeling in a place of power? How can she set forward a consequence when she doesn't feel she has any cards to play? What can she do?
Well, I guess it depends on the context of why she's feeling disempowered. If she's feeling disempowered simply because she's not a breadwinner and he is, well, then I'll be saying to her, like, hey, you've got to go and do something that's going to make yourself feel empowered and feel loved and worthy in this relationship. If you're coming from a place of, look, this guy's just a power-hungry douchebag who's using the power to control and manipulate and get his way, well, then you've got to really assess and ask yourself, like, how much of this am I okay with, and at what point am I going to say no? Now, I know it gets challenging out there. Like I work with a lot of women from women's refuges and stuff, and it's horrible, some of the things that women go through. So and I empathize. But staying is never the answer. Like it's not the answer. And yes, it's gonna get shit before it gets better. Like it's not easy to leave, especially if you've been a stay-at-home mom for 15 years and you've got no career, and like you don't have the know-how to just enter a workforce. It's gonna be hard. It's gonna come with its challenges. But people stay in abusive relationships because the fear, the thought of doing it by themselves is more overpowering than the fear of coming home and having to eat that whatever you're eating every day.
I also think that cultural customs have a huge part to play in the fear of someone's making a decision to leave a relationship just because of how they're going to be perceived either by their family or just through the beliefs that have been instilled in them. So I do feel like it's such a difficult thing to grapple with, to stay or whether to leave, because I feel like not only are people dealing with the thought of, oh, I don't want to do this alone, I don't want to do life alone. Maybe they are willing to do it alone, but they're not willing to deal with the opinions that's going to come from their family and the judgment that's going to come and the being made to feel like a failure. Like,
yeah, and look, you're right. It's always layered, right? And at the end of the day, it's all some type of conditioning that we have, whether it be social conditioning or peer pressure because of you must be married, you must stay married, or depending on different cultures, it's there's all these layers. But at the end of the day, like what we're talking about is the individual. Like, how do you feel? Are you happy? And so when people are that deep into it, just the fear of public opinion is gonna scare them. Like that person has a lot of work to do. Like a lot of work to do.
exactly.
But I still believe that the first step, like if it's an abusive relationship and you've got to get out, the first step is getting out, like always.
Yeah.
And just like I say that because another person, you may have heard of Dr. Bruce, I wanted to say Lipstein, Dr. Bruce Lipton.
Lipton.
Yeah, Bruce Lipton. So he is a master in epigenetics, and I attended a lecture of his once. It was really profound for me, where he shared about when you take a person or you take a piece of material and you put it in a different compound, or you take a person out of an environment and you place them in a different environment, that person will naturally start adapting to the new environment. And so quite often the hardest thing to do is to make that decision to leave. But once you're out and you're in another environment, like from the moment you make that decision, your life is already, the world is already transpiring to bring you closer to this joy and this happiness that you want. But it's just taking that first step. And like, I don't believe anybody is beyond change or transformation. I look at my life, I'm like, shit, like how the fuck you end up here? Like you were there. So I know that if I can do it, anybody can do it. And it's just a matter of like having the ability to create and build rapport with somebody and then giving them that, metaphorical kick up the ass. Like, okay, right, go, leave now. And a lot of, sorry?
Is there a way to save the relationship? Like, what would be some techniques that let's say, for example, someone in an Eastern culture, and we've already understood that leaving is not an option. And even a lot of Kiwi women I've spoken to where, there's significant assets involved and they want to not salvage, but they want to preserve what has been built up over time. So they're looking for solutions that can preserve the relationship and create harmony between the two parties. So agreements is great. And I was getting at what kind of consequences would be suitable for, say, a female, whatever the perception of difference in power, to put forward in these kinds of statements where they're negotiating the breaking of agreements. What can they say to coach the significant other to show up for them in a respectful manner? Because maybe he's not the trash to be taken out. Maybe he needs some tweaking, or her, right? Whoever it is that is repeatedly doing things that are not on. How can we lead them to the water for a change that will preserve the relationship? So I'm not talking about someone that's physically beating her, but maybe sometimes he's just a regular, certain words that you've used, but he has his good qualities. And so looking to the good qualities, what can we do to assist him to be better, while also acknowledging we know we can't change people. We know that we can't control people. What can we do? Is there a way?
Accept people the way they are. Like, people, we're not here to change each other, right? Like, it's about we the ones who carry the suffering, right? So it's like, for example, my husband comes home from work every day. He doesn't really give me much attention. I'm not feeling the affection or anything like that. And I feel like all I do is slave away at home, blah, blah, blah. So at this point, this woman has already created this massive story in her mind that her husband is a certain way. And the lack of attention and affection that she's feeling, she's now blaming him for. So instead of looking, like, what the advice I would give somebody in a situation like that is, look at what the story is that you have about your husband that's creating the disconnect, because you're the one feeling the disconnect. So it's your story and it's your beliefs that are getting in the way. And your husband might not be, his love language might not be touch. It might not be words of affirmation. It might not be acts of service. So how does he show his love? His way of showing love might be, I'm going to wake up every day at 5 o'clock, work hard, make sure you have a house, make sure you have food, and that's my love language. And you have this expectation of, but I want cuddles and I want da-da-da-da-da, and you're not getting that. And so now you start making him wrong for just being him. No, like, if you married this man, you knew that this is the way this man is, now accept him. You want love, you want affection, listen to him from a place of love and affection, and be that in your relationship, and it'll show up.
I couldn't help but think about that when you were saying that, Ruth, about what do you do, and I was thinking, what is the narrative that they're telling themselves? What is it, and how can they accept it, come to accept it, and also be empowered to change that narrative that they have inside themselves of the other person that they're in this relationship with. That sounds more empowering to me and more something that's doable for me, rather than sitting around waiting for someone to change for me. So.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the 5 love languages, but if you haven't, this is an idea that was developed in the early 90s by a counselor named Gary Chapman. And he broke down how people give and receive affection into 5 different types. So you have words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, and receiving gifts. And essentially, everyone is different. If you speak a different love language, you might be sitting there, as you said, Arlan, creating a narrative in your head about why aren't they doing ABC? And the problem is they speak a different language to you. So if they're working hard to pay the bills, that is how they're showing their love. And they're not going to be necessarily saying romantic things or doing other romantic things because they have a specific way of demonstrating it.
Well, I just wanted to explore a little bit this thought of, if someone is coming to you and is saying, my husband is not doing this and this and this, and that's how I feel love. Is there an opportunity for that person to look inside themselves and think, what is it that I'm not meeting of my own needs in this situation that I'm projecting onto my partner to fulfill that need for me? What is it that I can do myself to, like, is that an avenue you sometimes go down? Or I'm not sure if that's more of just like a one-on-one counseling type of thing, or a relationship couples therapy thing.
Yeah, I mean, so the reason why I run an 8-week program is because there's a few things to cover, and the foundation of my work is based on inner child healing, on healing our two deepest core wounds, the one by our mom and the one by our dad, and exploring how that shows up in life. And it's always an abandonment wound. It's always the thing that's right there, right? So, oh, my husband isn't doing blah, 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 he isn't showing up in a certain way. And when we start feeling anxious about it, or it's like, what's actually getting triggered inside of me right now? And that's the place to go and look at with any trigger, whether it's triggering emotion, sadness. It's like, like, is this actually, 40-year-old Arlan showing up now? Or is this 12-year-old Arlan who wasn't picked for a soccer game, and is now throwing his toys out the cot? So there's always the self-reflection part. But the other thing is that people miss in communication in relationships is actually carving out time to sit down and communicate. And I mean, you can just sit down and let's just look at each other for like 2 minutes and not say a word, and just like get lost in each other's space and souls. People don't communicate at that level. It's like, there was this meme about having hall sex, like walking past each other. Fuck you, fuck you. It's like, so a lot of relationships end up like that, where people just live by each other and speak at each other, say things to each other, but they never really stop to communicate. And this really profound thing happens when they do. Like the first time I get people to actually stop, connect with each other, create some space, just create a space of connection and then communicate, is they immediately start getting the impact of who they being on the other person. And once we get the impact of our way of being, if that impact makes us feel shit, naturally, and this is where the NLP techniques come in, is we have people sit in the impact that they're having on other people, and suddenly they don't want to sit in that shitty feeling. I don't want to feel shit anymore. Okay, so what do you think needs to change? My behavior? Yes. Okay, let's do that. And that's how people change, and that's how relationships evolve and grow and thrive every step of the way. It's because there's this level of accountability where we can't escape each other. And I constantly, like, if I come home and look at my wife every day and she's sad and miserable and crying, I'm going to feel like shit, right? Like if I have any little bit of compassion or empathy and I can be with my wife who's sad, I don't want it to be sad. I'm going to want to do things to make her happy, and I'm going to change and shift. But for that to happen, I have to first be able to connect with her and acknowledge that, oh shit, she's like, there's something in my behavior that's causing this. So I want to change. I want to shift. I want to transform. Yeah. So there's hope. There's hope. Like if you have a shitty husband or a shitty wife, trust me, everybody can change. Everybody at our core, we are all good, beautiful people. Like love lives in all of our core. We just need to feel safe enough to open up and explore that.
That's great. I really appreciated that. And I think that a lot of people will be able to see that as a starting point where they can bring these concepts into their communication. And while you were saying that, I was thinking, if someone has had a lot of traumatic experiences in their childhood, like yourself, and they are continually going back to those stories. This happened when I was 2 years old. This happened when I was 5. And did you know these things happened to me? ABC. Where should someone who is just kind of being inundated with the repetition of those stories and saying, "Oh, I want to get out of this," where should they go? Where should they start when they just can't stop replaying these things, and that trauma is very locked and stuck? Where should they start?
Right there at that point where they're locked and stuck. Like it's almost like there's this light being shone for you. Like, hey, go and look there. Like, what happened? And this is the impact of trauma, right? It's like a little pebble drops into a pond and you have the splash, and then every ripple after that is a timeline throughout your life. And so unless you deal with that moment, the traumatic event or experience happened, and you sit with the emotion that you felt, because that's the thing that we're holding on to. You notice people can never remember things. You ask them, like, what happened? Oh, I can't remember. My childhood is a blank. Because your brain is designed to keep you safe, so it doesn't want to remember it. So you forget it. But for some reason, it lives with you because there's been an emotional and energetic imprint that lives in your body at a cellular level that's still there, that you haven't released. And so it keeps coming back, and you know exactly where it is. You just haven't addressed it yet. So you can see it. And now that you can see it, it's very, very simple work. It's like, okay, let me go back to this moment. What happened? I'll share a story with you guys. Marissa Pierce, I was doing a hypnotherapy session. So at this point, I'd done a few years of work. And the furthest back I could get was in my childhood when I was about 7 years old. And what I remember, so we're sitting in this at home in our little small lounge. It's really it's compressed and compact. And my mother's 7 brothers are sitting in here. They're all drinking, so you can't even really walk past through the lounge to get to the kitchen. And I come in from playing outside, and my mom's home from work. All I want to do is get to my mom. But to get to my mom, I've got to walk through this maze of drunk uncles. And just knowing that they're there, I'm already in the state of fear, because I know they're going to grab me, slap me around my head, force alcohol into my mouth. So as a child, I'm already scared. And so I make it through this maze. All of the above has now happened. And I get to my mom and I'm like, grab on a dress. She's busy cooking dinner. I'm like, Mom. And she looks at me and she's like, Arlan, can't you see I'm busy? Just go to your room. In that moment, that little boy felt so unseen and unloved. And I remember, like, I can close my eyes and just feel myself walking off, sad, climbing out my bedroom window again and poof, into the streets again. And for me, in that moment, I make it mean that my mom doesn't love me, nobody loves me, and the world is an unsafe place. So for the rest of my life, I go through life looking at the being that I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, and the world is scary. So that was something I got to pretty early on. But then I started going deeper with hypnotherapy and working with different audio frequencies. And I was doing a meditation session with Marissa Pierce, and we're going deeper and we're going deeper. And suddenly, here's adult me walking into a bedroom. This is a bedroom that I lived in when I was a child. And everything is familiar. My eyes are closed. And as I walk into this bedroom, I look to my left and I see my sister sitting on a bed, and she's holding me, but she's got her mouth over my face. I'm watching this. So I'm crying. She's trying to stop me from crying. And I look to the right and I see my father with his hand around my mom's throat, and he's choking her and he's threatening to kill us all. And I can see vividly the look on my mom's face. It looks like her eyes want to pop out of her face. And I look back down at my sister who's holding me, and I see this baby, this maybe 1-year-old version of me. I see my soul leave my body. And in that moment, what I experience is this shell of anxiety. And in that moment, I got for the first time that my entire life I'd been living inside that shell of anxiety. I just had never experienced it from an outside perspective before. And I was like, shit, I feel like this every day. This has been my core existence up until this moment. I was unaware of it. I didn't even know that this was my existence. And so now I'm in touch. I've made connection. I've connected with a version of me and a pain that I've been carrying since I was a baby. And now I could address that. I could comfort that child and let him know that, hey, guess what? Like, we started at the bottom, now we're here, you know? We've got this. You don't have to be afraid anymore. You don't have to be anxious anymore. And that's the work. And the moment that happens, it just transmutes through your entire timeline. You just start, you just get it. It just drops like poof. Oh, shit, I can see why I've been so needy. Could see why I'd always been an anxious attacher in relationships. Like, it's all because of that need that wasn't met when you were a child.
Wow. That was so much, Arlan. Thank you for sharing those very intense and intimate stories from your childhood. I really felt that, especially the story of how you made it past all those drinking uncles, only to come to your mom's skirt and her to send you away. I felt that sadness, like, oh, I've been through all that to get to you and you send me away. Like, it's really sad. And so what I'm hearing is that everything comes back to inner child work, reparenting the child from those key moments.
That's it. That's it.
It's a lot of emotion and pain to get through, but so beautiful. Such beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Lessons.
You know, it's not even that bad. You know, like we've just got to do the work to identify those moments, because we're already carrying the pain. It's not going to be more painful. It's just it's already who we are. Like, it's just, are we taking the time in our lives to stop and actually go and do that work? Because what happens when we don't is we end up in these dysfunctional relationships where we place monumentous expectations on our partners to fix, or heal something inside of us that they never had a chance, you know. And this is where expectations come from. It's like, oh, I want a daddy figure, or I want a mommy finger. I want somebody that's going to be making me sandwiches every day, or I want, you know.
Can I just say that, like, when you do the work like you've done and you've gone through those experiences and you've unlearned a lot of these false beliefs that you've held about yourself, when you do that, it's so easy to spot the other people who have as well. You become so much more self-aware of the situations you're putting yourself in. You become so much more aware of other people and their limitations. and without saying to someone, oh, you haven't done the work, you just know because of how they're showing up in your space, you know, in this energetic exchange that you're having with this person. So I think for anyone out there who's listening, to, if you're on the fence about, oh, but I don't have much to work on, you know, it's always been the other person that's had the problem, like, I would strongly challenge you to look inside yourself and see for yourself and do the work, and then see how it changes your life after that point onwards, because your relationships are just gonna get more, they're gonna be more rewarding. And not just personal relationships, work relationships, friendships, relationships you have with your family, the people that you love who you've been surrounded yourself with for years. Like, your entire world is just going to be enriched.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you do the work on yourself, your outer world will change. It will transform. Like, it's just inevitable.
I do have one more question that's maybe more like formulaic, if you will. But do you have any quick fire techniques for people if they are finding themselves bickering or arguing with someone, significant other, whoever, how they can address that in the middle of the heated moment? Someone's coming at them or trying to pick a verbal argument, what they can do to face that? Do you have any, like, I know at work or in management, we usually have different acronyms and things you can use, whether you're giving someone feedback or dealing with certain situations. What would be is there anything that's the relationship version of that for expression in moments of conflict? Bianca?
Just before you get into that, Arlan, and share your words of wisdom, this made me think, and I was just thinking it a few moments ago, was that what I've found is doing the work, right? What comes with that is you start to find yourself facing opportunities to choose. Are you going to be your old you? You're going to be the new you, And when you feel like you're being triggered, when you're feeling like that inner child is being awoken inside of you, and you are faced with conflict of some sort, because you are so self-aware, what happens is that when people say I've done the work, it doesn't mean that the difficulties are no longer going to be there. You might still feel yourself feeling abandoned in some type of way. When you recognize these, and I'm not a relationship coach or anything like that, but just my own journey and self-discovery, all that kind of thing, I've found that I recognize the opportunity when it arises, and then I act accordingly. And I try not to allow my feelings, my strong inner child that's like yelling at me to do something about this. I don't allow that to dictate what comes out of my mouth or how I react to the situation. So that's what I'm thinking here, is that when people find themselves in conflict or find themselves in a difficult situation, they feel themselves getting triggered, that when you are actively working on yourself, you recognize these as opportunities and you make the switch. That's the 2 cents that I want to add to that. So
Yeah, spot on, and that's a certain level of awareness to get to, like in relationships that a lot of people haven't achieved yet. And so, like, to answer the question, I normally, like, I get this a lot, and people are like, what do you want? What am I supposed to do? I'm like, stop it. Like, but we're always arguing. I'm like, yes, stop it. Like, stop arguing. Like, when you're arguing, you already know, like, you're in it. It's already gone to where you don't want it to go. So the first thing you've got to do is stop. And like, as human beings, like the way our minds work, like we are taking in about 2 million bits of information every second. And then our brain has the capacity to sort of filter through about 150 bits of that information. And then we end up using about 7 bits of that information, and we create a story or a belief from that, like 2 million bits that's coming at us in an argument, in a heated argument. And we like trying to filter out a response that's going to use like 5 bits of that information. It becomes almost impossible, right? And that's why we're in this heightened state of anxiety in an argument, because we're trying to process all the shit. And we are not in the correct state to do it. So if you find yourself in an argument, just stop. take a moment like, hey, listen, I actually, like, we're really good at compartmentalizing things. Like, this conversation, I'm not in a state of mind to have right now. Can I have it? Can we take a time out? Can we talk about it later this evening? Can we come back and talk? It's very important to say by when, so you don't leave the other person hanging or use that as an emotional blackmail tool of I'm gonna give them the silent treatment. It's like, no, I'm not in a state of mind, or we're not in a state of mind to have this conversation now. Can we come back and address this when we're in a different state, when we're both calmer, and then we can talk about it? So, and it's a game changer and relationship saver when people can do that. Like, so if you're in a place already where it's constant bickering, just learn to stop bickering. Just don't. If you see you're gonna bicker, stop. Say when you're gonna come back to address this conversation when you are both in a calmer state. Like
That's great. Yeah, stop it. And if the other person is being nasty or like, firing shots, oh, you don't understand me, you don't do this, you don't do that, and maybe they're acting out, is there something that someone can do for that? Like,
yeah,
if
look,
they're
I have a mentor. He's this 80-year-old short Mexican dude. His name is Jorge Castro. He's the most loving. This dude is just love and compassion every step of the way, right? And he'll tell you straight up, it only takes one person to make a relationship work, and that person is me. I'm like, what? He's like,
I
yeah.
love that.
If my wife is arguing, who's the one interpreting it as an argument? Me. She's just being her. Like, she's just doing what she's doing. If it occurs as an argument, it's occurring as an argument where? Here. So how it occurs, how this whole interpretation is happening is my interpretation. So the only thing that needs to shift and change is my interpretation of what's going on. And one of the most powerful things I learned in communication, I was doing this program called the Team Management Leadership Program, which is this elite team management program designed on communication. And over these 2.5 years, I started identifying communication that I couldn't be with. So what is communication that I can't be with? One is shouting. People raised voices. It scares me. The other one is people looking at me with like a straight face, like without it's, like they don't have a soft
like an evil
smile.
look, like they're
a rigid,
like
Like
yeah,
a
like
intense stare. Like
yeah. So there's all these things in communication: shouting, swearing. So I have created all these rules that when people communicate in a certain way, I make it mean X, Y, Z, rude, abusive, blah, 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 blah. But what they really just being is an expression of themselves in that moment. And I'm making it mean that they're disrespecting me, they're being rude. No, that person's just communicating. Like, and there's so much more, but because we triggered, obviously we like they saying something, we triggered, we making it mean all the shit, versus actually, hey, are you okay? Like, I noticed you speaking to me in a really loud voice and almost shouting. Did you have a bad day? Like, you want to sit down? You want to talk about it? Instead of taking it personal, like, oh no, let me bring some compassion to what this person is dealing with right now. And that's what happens when we can control our own triggers, when we can be emotionally intelligent about a situation. It's like, I don't have to make it mean that this person is being rude. They're just shouting. Let me bring some compassion to this. Like, why are you shouting? Oh, you angry. This happened. Oh, that happened today. Okay. And once that person has had the opportunity to get all of that off their chest, it just dissipates. Because all they really wanted was to be heard. But instead, what they met with is, I'm going to get defensive because you're talking to me in a tone that I don't like. And so we run these vicious cycles when really I'm the one responsible. I always was. And so when I speak to couples, I'll address one person and put them in the naughty corner and be like, it's all on you. It's your fault. It's all on you. And then I'll address the other person and say exactly the same thing. Because ultimately, that's what radical responsible relationships are about is no, whatever's going on here is because of me, and I'm going to take responsibility for it.
This is awesome. Game changer. And as long as people are willing to take responsibility and have that accountability, then changes can occur. So there's a lot of hope in this message, and it's been really awesome to have you on the show. Bianca, did you have any other comments, final comments?
No, just like I just love everything that you've spoken about, Arlan. Just, you know, almost reinforcing what I've already kind of discovered about myself and my own journey through life. And yeah, it's actually been very validating in a way. Just, yeah, hearing you talk about accountability and the narrative that you that you're telling yourself, the story you're telling yourself, and the work that's involved, you know, getting back in touch with your inner child and reparenting. Oh, there's like so many good truths that have been spoken today, and it makes me excited to, I guess, you know, continue on this journey that I'm doing on my own. Just it makes me feel like I'm doing something right, and that, yeah, you know, I've come a long way from where I used to be, and yeah, it's really nice. So I really appreciate all the knowledge that you've shared today with us, Arlan. It's been priceless.
No, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the questions. And look, you know, it's the work is never done. You know, it's I always use the analogy of like a mechanic whose car always has problems. You know, my life is never smooth. You know, I'm always having big conversations. I'm always making mistakes. I'm always creating breakdowns in every area of my life. But it's because I'm up to big things and I have the tools to go and make things whole and complete again immediately. So I don't let things linger like yuckiness and, you know, all of these sanskaras of resentment. And it's like, no. And when things get too much, like, anybody, like no matter what you're dealing with, literally go sit quiet for 10 days somewhere without any distractions. You will sort your own life out from the inside out. Like,
I really love what you said. Just sorry, there was something that a thought just came to me about there are situations that I've found just coming out of relationships. Sometimes you can have this belief about yourself that it's something that that because of the interaction that you've had with the other person, it's made you feel a certain way about yourself, and you've started to believe these things, these accusations that may have been flying around in the heat of the moment, and the words stick with you, and you think, oh, I guess I am this horrible person, you know, like, and so doing the work on myself and rediscovering myself and reparenting and all that kind of thing, I really felt like this year has been such a learning curve for me in understanding who I am, and also figuring out, great, like I am this gentle, loving, kind-hearted person. I'm not what I thought I was in that old relationship or whatever, you know. I am, and I'm just like telling myself this, like kind of reprogramming myself, the self-belief, and empowering myself, being like, I'm a good person. I care about others. I am kind-hearted, you know, all these things. and then actually believing it. And once you start believing that about yourself, then when you go into a relationship, you're bringing this belief in, and it's something that translates to the other person as well, you know, and then you guys come off on a good footing because you already have started on a sure footing of knowing who you are and knowing your baggage. Everyone has it, right? And accepting that, but knowing that you're not a victim, or you're not a monster because of that baggage. And I think for the singles out there who are, you know, looking and probably finding themselves not landing in the right type of relationships for them, to just, you know, continue on with your journey, continue on doing the work for yourself. It never ends. But to have this base knowledge and belief that you are a good person, and know what you bring to the table, and being aware of the presence you bring into the relationship. When you realize the value that you bring into a relationship, you're going to act with more integrity. You're going to act so much more, you know, like it's hard to explain, but I think you get it. Just for those who are single out there and just thinking, I'm not finding the one. It's like, well, you find yourself first, and the one will eventually come when they come.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's such a desperate energy when somebody is like looking for somebody, you know, like you feel it. Like I go out on a lot of dates, and it's like, it's right there, and it's so tangible. It's like, no, like, you know, for me, if I go
It's
out
very off-putting. It's very off-putting.
yeah, it's very, very, very off-putting. You know, like some of the best dates I have come from meeting random strangers in the supermarket, because there's no intention. You just meet, like, you know, yesterday I walked into Pack and Save, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm craving grapes. So I walk up to the grapes, and there's this lady standing in front of me, and I see her take a grape out of a bag, and she puts it in her mouth. So like I come right next to her, and I look at her, and she looks at me, and I'm like, how's the grape? And she burst out laughing. She's like, it's got seeds in it. I'm like, I want seedless grapes. She's like, you have an accent. Where you from? And we strike up this conversation, and we end up standing in the middle of a supermarket for like half an hour just chatting, versus trying to set
organic.
up. Yeah. So you spot on. You spot on. Yeah. With the and just one more thing. Sorry, like yes, I like to call it bells and whistles instead of baggage. You know, we all come we all come with our bells and whistles, and what makes relationships beautiful is when you can trust the other person to be vulnerable enough to share with them what your shortcomings are, what your weaknesses are. And if the person cares enough, they're never going to use that against you. They're going to be able to show compassion to you when you're working through that. It's like, I can hold it space for you to work through that. And that is where I think being vulnerable and finding somebody that you can trust to be vulnerable with is so important. And it's a game changer. So thanks for bringing it up.
No worries.
Thank you, everyone, for showing up today and sharing your gems of wisdom. I think this has been, it's given me all the touchy feels, but also very practical as well. And I'm excited to know that this information is going out there. People who maybe have not been introduced to inner child work, who have not done introspection, might get really excited to see that there are tools, there are resources that they can access and start to use that can take them closer to their best future. So maybe you're not in a good place right now. Maybe you've had some tough times in the past, and that is absolutely okay. But you don't have to stay there. There's so much more for you. So thank you, everyone, for listening in. And remember, the path to your best reality is in your hands to create when you become conscious.